Hi guys, so I'm just going to say a few things about some popular types, of the most popular types of medieval dagger. So here we're looking primarily at the 14th and 15th centuries, the High Middle Ages. Okay, on this side we have what's called a Rondell dagger. In the middle we have what's called a Bullock dagger, and on my right hand side here, over here, we have what's called a Bazilov. So let's treat one at a time. Let's look at the Bazilov first. So the Bazilov was a style that seems to have come about perhaps in the 12th century, but really started to appear more commonly in the latter part of the 13th century, and then really reached its apex of design of this type in the 14th century. Okay, this very characteristic eye shape. And primarily, although not totally, it seems to have been the civilian gentleman's or middle class person's dagger of choice. Now, an important thing to mention on medieval daggers is that medieval daggers were very important in the medieval world because outside of Germany and outside of certain Italian cities, in most medieval cities in Western Europe at least, it was actually illegal to walk around wearing a sword. Okay, so the populace couldn't at that time just wander around wearing a long sword or an arming sword. So instead they wore daggers, partly to protect themselves and partly no doubt to show their status and show the fact that they were willing to protect their rights and all of those sort of things. And in actual fact, the only people who could walk around English or French cities wearing swords were knights or above. Okay, and it's important to mention that people use the term knight quite a lot, but to be a knight you had to be knighted, and most knights were not actually knights technically, they were men-at-arms. Okay, so for example, if you look at the Battle of Agincourt, most of the English knights were not knights, they were men-at-arms, they weren't knighted. The number of men who were knighted were a very small minority, much as in modern England today. Okay, so the Bazilov was particularly popular, and we're fairly certain that it's called Bazilov because it's named after Basel in Switzerland, or Basel, however you pronounce it, and it seems to have been a style that emanated from Switzerland and quickly gained popularity in the rest of Europe, particularly in France, Germany and England. Okay, but it was seen pretty much all over Europe. So this is a late 14th century style Bazilov, and they have various types of blade on them. This one is made by Fabrice Cognot, spelt Cognot, and he's a bladesmith based in France, in Burgundy, a friend of mine, long-time friend of mine. You can find him on Facebook or just by googling him. And you'll notice they have very thin grip, but you wedge your hand in there and it actually gives quite a good grip, and thanks to the eye shape of it, whether you hold it point up or point down, you get quite good edge alignment and quite a good grip on it. And this is a double-edged variety. Most of them are double-edged, and most of them have some type of fuller in the middle. That's the groove that runs up the middle, and most of them are sort of diamond section. Kept in the scabbard, worn in various ways, either on the hip on the side or in the middle in front of your crotch, with the most common ways of wearing them. Okay, right, next up, another very popular civilian and military dagger, and this is known as the Bullock dagger or Bullock knife. It should be fairly obvious, hopefully, to viewers, assuming you can see clearly, why it's called that, because it has two testicle-like protrusions here on the grip. Okay, this is probably a mid to late 15th century style, this particular example is made by Todd of Todd Stuff, who makes excellent daggers. You can look him up equally on Facebook or through Google, and that's Todd with 1D, T-O-D. This example has a very thick, some would say armour-piercing style blade on it, so quite a military style blade. Some of them have thinner knife-type blades, almost Bowie-like blades. And you know, why was it shaped like this? We don't really know. It's lost in the mists of time. However, they were often worn in front of the crotch, and it does obviously look like a rather rude appendage, but medieval people had quite a coarse sense of humour and more earthy sense of humour, should we say, than a lot of us today, and so maybe they just liked it as a masculine symbol. But essentially it's a dagger blade with that style hilt on, and as far as using it is concerned, it actually gives a very nice, it's quite nice to grip. It feels very comfortable in the hand, and if you're exerting a lot of force with a stab, it's also quite nice and rounded and cushioned. You're not going to hurt your hand on it. Okay, yes, there we go. That's what I'll say about that. Various types of scabbard, sometimes worn on the side, sometimes worn in front of the crotch, as I say. So, last up is the Rondell dagger, and this is the type which is mostly shown in the fencing manuals or combat treatises that we have from the time. This has almost identical blade to the other one, and this is a blade also made by Todd Stuff. Actually, the hilt, it was made by me, and it's a very thick, armour-piercing blade. And the thing which defines a Rondell dagger is the rondel, which is in a sense a handguard. However, what's really important about it is because it's a great big disc, you can exert huge amounts of power behind that point, and your hand is not ever going to slip past the guard onto the blade. And for those of you who've ever looked at crime reports, for example, where people have used folding knives, pocket knives, kitchen knives or craft knives as weapons in modern crime, it's very, very common for the person stabbing to cut their hand, because in stabbing, when the blade meets with resistance on their victim's body, the hand slides up and actually cuts the top of the hand. So having a great big disc there, and if you'll notice some modern tools, certain types of chisel for example, also have a big plastic now disc there to prevent the hand from sliding up onto the tool itself. So it enables you to get a lot of force behind the blow and punch through mail or padded armour in the gaps of armour, or just stabbing an unarmoured person. In fact, it gives you more power behind the blow. Some of them have a disc at the back end, some of them like this, usually the earlier types, have just a small pommel. And these were popular from the middle of the 14th century right the way through to the 16th century. Okay, very popular type of dagger, and these are the ones that are normally shown in the fighting manuals, fighting treatises of the end of the 14th through to the 16th century. So a last thing I want to say about medieval daggers. I've mentioned why they were important, because most civilians didn't walk around with swords unless they were travelling. So in cities, dagger was all you could carry usually, plus an eating knife and perhaps a stick. Really, the thing which is interesting to a lot of people who study modern knife forms and modern knife defence is that in the medieval and Renaissance treatises, actually the most predominant style of grip on the knife or dagger is point down. Okay, I'm not going to in this video go into why that is, but the medieval manuals predominantly show point down. They do also show point up, but point down is more common. Okay, thank you.